You ever had spiritual amnesia? Now, I'm looking out at some of your eyes and some of your faces. And some of you I know very well. And I know you have been following Christ for years. Okay? Not to embarrass you, but you've been following Christ longer than I've been alive. Okay? Which is getting to be a very big deal now, because I'm getting a little older. But you've been following Christ for many years. And you can make a list, an inventory of what God has done with you. I mean, go back to the very day He saved you. I mean, you woke up and you're like, God forgave me of my sins. And you look at your life, you look how He's provided financially, you look at what He's done for you with your health and your contentment and your family, and you look at all the blessings and the friends and the church body, and you look at all these blessings, and all of a sudden, the lightning cracks and the waves come over, and you're like, where's God? What's He going to do? And there's this absence of recall, remembering what God has done. That was, when I read the Old Testament, that's basically the M.O. of Israel. It's like God does these amazing things for them, and then they're just like, who's God? Forget about Him. Let's follow this idol because that seems to work for my neighbor. And they just completely forget about God, and they're going their own crazy way. And God's having to bring them back in and trying to get their attention. And we're so prone to do that. Just to forget. That's what fear will do. Fear will cause you to forget what God has already done, His faithfulness, His promise, His trustworthiness. The third thing I see, if you're following your notes, is that fear causes us to worship safety. This is the end of the road. This is that ultimate negative consequence. Now, you would never come right out and say that, but that's exactly what happens. Now, understand, fear itself is not a sin. Fear leads to sin. Okay? It's healthy to be afraid. Okay? There's a reason why you should tell your children about not playing in the road. You want a little bit of fear in them. Don't go play in the street. Fear can be healthy. Okay? Fear can keep you from smoking cigarettes. Okay? You look at a few of those slides and you're like, oh man, that's what happens. Yeah, don't smoke. Okay? Fear can be healthy. But when fear starts to follow this track and path, when the storms of life become so overwhelming that I begin to question God's character and I begin to forget what He's done for me, then what becomes my God is safety and a risk-free life. Now look at it's implicit there, it's not stated, but you can almost sense and hear the tone of the voice when the disciples basically say, do something, hey, wake up, fix the problem. Now, certainly they were probably more polite than that, but that's sort of what goes on inside, doesn't it? We get a bit demanding about God. Demanding for results and response. And here's what happens. When you start to blame God and question God and, dare I say, accuse God, He is no longer God. Safety is God. And the God you supposedly worship, He just becomes a servant of safety. And that's why we criticize Him and blame Him and accuse Him and become angry at Him when He doesn't serve our God, safety, the way we think He should. When He doesn't give us the risk-free life that we believe we are entitled and that we are owed. We begin to worship. And worshiping safety and worshiping a risk-free life is a very fickle God. An imposter, really. Very fickle, because one day's change, one phone call, one change of events, one turn on a road, and your life can be completely and drastically and ultimately changed. And let me tell you, if safety is your God, if relieving risk and fear in your life becomes your end-all purpose, you will crash. You will become a very angry person. You will become a very controlling person. You will begin to self-medicate. You will begin to destroy yourself emotionally, physically, because that God doesn't exist. He has no power. He can bring no promise and no help and security. All the while we're sabotaging our trust and our confidence in God by doubting His character, by doubting what He's done, and ultimately replacing Him with an inferior imposter. When I read the last part of the verse there, if you're following in verse 26 where we left off, because there's something we need to discover in the storm. There's something that if you're a follower of Christ that you need to recall, that you need to remember, that you need to learn, you need to grow and develop. And I read verse 26, and I love how Jesus intervenes. Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. And these men, look at this, were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Isn't that a statement? Isn't that a wonderful statement? What kind of man is this? He just controls the weather. Even the winds and waves obey him. And here's what we ultimately need to discover, that Jesus Christ is in control. That he is in control. Now that is a very difficult thing to learn. It is the reason why the command is repeated so often, and not just by Jesus. I mean, Paul says it over and over again, encouraging Timothy to be strong and to be diligent. And God's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And over again, we're challenged by Jesus and his apostles to abandon fear, to reject fear, to avoid the path to where it leads, to trust God, to grow in a knowledge of God. And so I'm going to give you this morning maybe just three helpful prescriptions, if you will, three remedies that'll help us to overcome fear and the temptations it presents. The first one I see there is read. Read. And I put the 3 R's here so you remember it. The first one, read. Develop a deeper knowledge of who he is. A deeper knowledge. Now this is important. My wife was reminding me of a story. This is very interesting. Must have been 3 or 4 weeks ago. I lose track of time. Maybe a little more than that. Maybe 5 or 6 weeks by now. And about 4 houses down from us, our neighbor's house burned, almost completely to the ground. And my neighbors, Jay and Karen, they live right across the street. So they were there. They know what was taking place. It happened about 4 or 5 in the morning on Sunday morning. Thankfully that no one was hurt or injured badly. They were rescued. Now we were completely asleep. I guess that tells you how well we sleep. We were oblivious. My wife goes, she does an early morning run on Sundays, and she comes out and there's like fire trucks everywhere. I'm like, whoa, what happened? 5 o'clock in the morning. And so we were completely oblivious, but we drove by that morning, and the boys, I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they are just, this is the biggest thing that ever happened to them. A house burned down. You mean that kind of thing can happen? They never heard of a house burning down, much less seeing one. And here's this completely hollowed out house, and you can imagine what it did to an 8 or 3-year-old. They were just like talking all the time about it. Their Cubbies teacher, I think Patty was telling me that my 3-year-old was praying, like weeks later, pray for the family whose house burned down. I mean, it's just like all they talked about was this house burning down. Well, it must have, I don't know, a week ago or 2 weeks ago now, I lose track of thought. But it was a Saturday night. This is several weeks after that house had burned down, and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden it's like, I smell smoke. You smell smoke? And we're kind of talking about smoke. This is crazy. So my wife walks around the house. She doesn't see anything burning. But we had a little light on the porch, and you could see the smoky haze. There's like some smoke in the air, and you can see in the lights. And then we heard this, wee, 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 wee. And it sounds like an alarm is going off. And we're thinking, we live next door to an elementary school. We're thinking, the school is burning down. These fears. And I admit, I thought it. I know, I looked around. I didn't see any flames, no fire trucks, but the alarm's going off, and we smelled the smoke. And my 8-year-old, he just loses it. I mean, he is panic. We walked around the house. We took him around the house. Look, there's no fire, but I smell smoke, and all this fear is welling up. And we're like, look, go to bed. The house isn't going to burn down. And you can imagine how well that went over, right? Oh, really? Thanks, Dad. If you have an 8-year-old, you know that's not what happened. And all his 8-year-old logic, he had to convince me that I was wrong and we were in immediate and urgent danger. Now, me and my graciousness and my loving kindness, I say, go to bed. My wife, in her long-suffering and understanding ways, she goes, come on, kids, let's go find out what's going on. And they get in the truck, and I'm like, all right, go ahead. I'm going to study. It's Saturday night. I got stuff to do. So they go driving around, and they drove in a neighborhood, and there was a neighborhood bonfire around the corner. And they drove by, and they saw the people hanging out, listening to music or whatever, and they saw like, oh, wow, there's the fire. That's probably the source of smoke. And so then we're like, well, what are we going to do about this alarm? There's this alarm going off. And it sounds like it's coming from an elementary school. So they had to go drive all the way around the other direction. And they came around the